Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is Karl Hebenstreit. He is an executive coach, author, speaker, leadership team, and organizational development consultant. Currently, he's a principal of Perform and Function LLC, which is for organizational development consultations. He was the principal organizational development consultant for Genentech. He is the author of the How and Why, Taking Care of Business with the Enneagram, and also a pretty cool book called Nina and the Really, Really Tough Decision, an introduction to the Enneagram through the lens of decision-making for children and adults. Karl, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Zen. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I think this is going to be a wonderful conversation. And just to clarify for our listening audience, these conversations are going to be different. I inquire of my guests when they first found their inner voice, their inner connection, that inner side of life that we're often bereft of understanding, let alone talking about with others, because we all seem so weird or crazy. And that's not the case. As a matter of fact, you got to make the inner solid before the outer can be. You got to love yourself before you can love others, in other words. And so we're working on that, and how others have found their strength, their inner wisdom, and how that's played out in their outer lives. So, Karl, that being said, when did you first get in touch with that other side of life and the connection that was revealed as a result?
So it's been a journey. I think everyone has a different journey, and it starts at different times and it progresses at different rates. I would say that the beginning part of realization about greater than myself and more about what's going on with the world and how everyone is really connected was probably when I was around 25 years old-ish. And I was in a role where I was rewarded, in a corporate role where I was rewarded. I did well. I was an individual. I was an individual contributor. I was achieving things. I was doing good work, and I was rewarded. And I was put into this new role that was brand new to me. But they said, "No, you can do it." And then they said, "Guess what? You're now going to go and you're going to give this presentation to all these people at a conference in Minneapolis, and yeah, it's all up to you. We're not even going to be there. You just do it yourself and represent the company." This was AT&T, by the way. This was a large company.
Wow,
And
what autonomy from a mega
yeah,
giant like that.
yeah. And I didn't know any better. I'm like, okay. So off I
That's
go.
often
And
when we do our best work, right? We don't know any better.
exactly. In my arrogance, in my, like, I know what I'm doing. They have faith in me. They this is what they want me to go forward with it. So I went out there and I'm like, I'm going to tell you what I know and you're going to love it, to this audience. And people just kept leaving in droves. And I was devastated. And I'm like, what just happened here? I'm obviously not in tune or attuned to what's going on in the needs of my quote unquote audience, but also the grander, broader area.
Let me ask a question based on that, just another layer, if you will. What was AT&T? What was going on with the company at that time? Were customers leaving in droves too?
Not at that point. This was pretty much in its heyday. And what was interesting was this was a concept which is also very much about universality. It was called Talent Alliance, and it was very forward thinking back then. AT&T and some other major organizations realized that they were downsizing, and some other people were hiring. Some companies were downsizing at the same time. And wouldn't it be great to share your resources? So if AT&T was losing people, their business required them to downsize, maybe they could transfer some people over to another company, maybe not even a competitor, but maybe they could learn something from this other company and then transfer back when business allowed them to.
Oh gosh, that sounds like collaboration.
It was this was 1990, I'm going to say 8. No, before that, was way before that. Maybe 87 or 86, 97 or 96. And so it was very novel. No one was doing it. And it was just, people were just very skeptical about it. Like, why would you do this? Why would you share your
Sure.
talent? Why would the competitors? What they're going to know what you do? And
Well,
it was,
WorldCom fell apart because they had one of their directors that had a piece of software that allowed all the divisions to talk to each other, and he wouldn't share it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you can see the forward thinking of AT&T even back then about sharing and collaborating and opening up and just being more democratic in
Mhm.
their approach.
Now that's
So
the outer side. I'm curious, kind of trace it back a little bit, if you will, and you may not have been asked this question before, but when you were growing up, when you were younger,
mhm.
there had to have been some elements that set you up, maybe not consciously at the time, but looking back, were there some events that where that connectedness, that idea that you and nature were maybe more compatible than others realized?
I've always had an affinity for the beach and the ocean and nature in that regard, not necessarily camping wise, but
Hmm.
definitely beach wise and water wise. That was always a very happy place for me. And I
Hmm.
was very fortunate that my parents were able to provide I was raised in Greece. So, there's water all
Wow.
around you. So it was easy on the weekends and for vacations to be on the water or in the water. So that connectivity was very
Almost a
refreshing and
paradise.
energizing to me. Yes, absolutely. And I was very fortunate to also be raised in a very loving way with my parents were there and my grandparents were there, my maternal grandparents.
Mm.
So even if my parents were at work or at school, my grandparents were always there to support me and raise me and love me. So I had that
And give you the
connectivity.
freedom to go explore on your own too, right?
Exactly. Oh,
Grandparents would like
exactly.
that.
Exactly. Yeah, I had a bicycle, and even if I was out with my grandparents, I'd be way ahead of them on the bicycle. I'd go back and check to make sure they were still following. But yeah, I'd have that freedom to explore, and even without them. So yeah, that was a very fortunate upbringing, and connectivity to love happened from a very early age for me.
Okay,
So I
so
felt that,
that gives
and
that foundation
mm,
that got you into that position with AT&T. So how did that move to the future?
so that understanding that I didn't necessarily know better than everyone else, and they didn't want to receive what I was giving and what I thought that they wanted,
Hmm.
led me to say, hold on a second, I really need to check into what's going on beyond just me or what I think is what they need, and get rid of that arrogance, if you will, that I knew better or that I knew what they needed. So every single time I
There
do
again,
any,
maybe you did know better and they just weren't ready for it.
that's true too. That's totally true. Readiness is a huge part of it. And by pushing them too much, which I did, I totally lost them.
Hmm.
So it's my lesson there is I don't necessarily know everyone else's immediate needs at that point that they're ready to address.
Hmm.
How do I find that out? So my immediate learning, and luckily I had two back-to-back sessions. So the first one was a disaster. And the second one, I applied my learning immediately. I said, what do you need? Tell me what you're here for. What can I do to answer your questions? Where are you right now? So I can answer your questions in the way that'll move you forward as opposed to just turn you off.
Now that's a phenomenal flip and an
Yeah.
excellent use of your learning, right? You
Mhm.
went from the prescription to the inquiry
Yeah.
because you got to know your audience. And this is
Yeah.
one of the things I think we miss. We have an idea we want to project or um, prescribe, put over something
Yeah.
instead of looking at it from an observer and asking, okay, what's the needs here?
Exactly. Yeah. So that was my lesson. And I was really fortunate to be able to apply it immediately. And I did not know the Enneagram back then. That was not anywhere in my radar.
Hmm.
And later on, how many years later, this was actually, it wasn't too many years later. So it would have been maybe 2000 that I was introduced to the Enneagram. that I then saw, okay, this is exactly what I need. This is opening the door to say, yeah, we have each and every one of these energies within us, and some people lead with one of them more than the other eight. How do I figure out where they are, what they need according to their fixation or where they, what they lead with, so that I can properly address them and move them forward as much as possible, and hopefully break them out of that fixation too.
And it would seem that when you, like any tool, right, you depersonalize it, you take the emotion out of it, you're able to see something and go, and I don't want to say you really take the emotion out of it, because you do sense the truth of it, and it
Mhm.
will resonate in your body
Mhm.
when it does.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that, again, this inner, awareness that we all have,
Yeah.
that we don't put to use, because in the
Yes.
indigenous philosophy, thousands of years old, they have a three brain system: the gut, the heart, and the head.
Yep.
That's the
Yep.
first brain. That's where all
Yeah.
the frequencies and vibrations are felt. And now today we have the evidence that, oh yeah, the gut's
Mhm.
really got all those neurosensors more than they're in the brain. So you can pick it
Exactly.
up, then move it up to the second brain, and you
Mhm.
discern whether, okay, this is comfortable, uncomfortable, desirable, undesirable.
Yeah.
Then you use the intellect
Mhm.
to make the choices as to how to navigate.
Right. And I love that you bring this up, because that's exactly how I prefer to introduce the Enneagram to people, to get them to understand it better. Because
Mm,
we do use that gut energy or body
we
energy.
all
We,
do.
we use,
It's, whether we think we do or not,
yeah,
biology and science says we do.
yeah. And we also use the heart energy. You
Mhm.
know, people feel, everyone feels, they may feel
Sure.
differently through different ways, but they do feel just like they have gut energy through different ways, through lenses, through perspectives.
Right.
And then we also have the intellectual, the head energy, the thinking styles. And so there are just happen to be three different Enneagram styles that correlate to each of the head, the heart, the gut.
Hmm.
So and by showing that we're not just one Enneagram style, that we do have each of them within us, yes, one of them will guide us and motivate us
Sure.
primarily as a core, and we still have the other two centers that also have a
Mhm.
style through which we experience them.
Now, could you go into a little more depth of which ones correlate, and
Oh yeah.
maybe somewhere in that,
Mhm.
what your perception of where I lay on that, or am on that scale?
Okay.
That'd be kind of fun,
So
right?
I'm not supposed to do that as an Enneagram
Hey, we're not
practitioner.
supposed to do a lot of things, and yet we do, right? If it feels good,
Yeah,
right?
each
And you
person.
have my permission.
So what if we do it a different way? So I stay true
Sure.
and integrity with my teachings. I will present them to you, and you can select one from each three. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. So each one of us, each human being is going to, so we'll start, you want to start with the gut. So we have gut energy. So the gut types are the 8, the 9, and the 1. So the gut style or energy for the 8 is immediate execution. It's protection. It's control. It's seeking authority. It's seeking to not be surprised by things and be prepared for it, to be able to protect themselves and their loved ones and their turf. So it's
Hmm.
the immediate gut passion and energy that you will experience. It's big energy, and
Okay.
that's an immediate action and execution. The 9, and that's the boss, protector, general, director. That's the the nomenclature that we use for the type 8 energy. The type 9 energy is very different, and it's more of a dampening and putting the brakes on things. It's stopping things. It's slowing things down. It's looking at the entire system, seeing how everything fits within it, seeing the totality. What are the repercussions to all the different components? And everything is equally good and valuable and necessary. So it does slow things down. It's not an immediate action, because all those things are taken into consideration, and conflict is avoided. And that's
Hmm.
the mediator or peacekeeper. That's the type 9 energy.
Okay.
And the type 1 energy, which again is still gut or body style, body center, is the perfectionist or reformer, looking to see what needs to be fixed, what could be better, what could be improved, what is right according to an inner value proposition of own ethics, own morals, own values. And so action is taken based on that.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see that the 8 and the 1, the 8 being the boss, protector, general director, and the 1 being the perfectionist or reformer, are probably a little bit more immediate activated or immediate more action. And the
Right.
9, let's slow it down and take action when necessary and not rock the boat.
It's funny. And so
So
you want,
between 8, 9, and 1, which would you select?
well, I'll say, if my wife would say this, she's probably pegged me as an 8 because I'm quick. Organizationally, I look for flow, which would be the 9.
Yeah.
What I find works best, and what I tend to do most often, is to take a big picture view of what needs to be done.
Yep.
So that would be the 1.
So it's incorporating all 3, and one of them will be the more prominent default.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you explain that, because you are taking all 3 of those into consideration, and that is what we all have to do. The goal is to integrate all 9 styles, all 9 types, so that we have the best, broadest understanding and explanation of the world and of people and the situation, and be able to act accordingly to what's going to be most effective and
Yes,
what's going to be
absolutely.
most
Totally agree.
appropriate in that
If it's all
situation.
connected, it's all connected, right?
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
not yes, but it's yes and.
And exactly.
Cool.
So,
All right. So
and
that's the gut. What about the
so
heart?
now we're going to move to the gut. From the gut, we're going to move over to the heart center, the feeling center. So it's an and there as well. So we not only have the gut energies that help us, but we also have the heart energies. So here we have the types 2, 3, and 4. The 2 is usually called the helper or giver, the considerate helper. And there's always an outward look to see other people's needs. What do other people need? What are their, what's going on for them right then that could be better for them, that the type 2 can help.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes this help is not welcomed or asked for. It's just intrusionary. Sometimes it's felt as being intrusionary.
Right.
And
It's
the
like trying
type
to give a
2,
teenager answers for questions they haven't asked yet.
exactly. They don't want to hear that. So the 2 has an intuition. The type 2s have this intuition of being able to see what other people need, even if the other person doesn't see that they need it. For
Mm-hmm.
example, in your example, the teenager. And that's the gift, is that ability to intuitively know what they need and to be able to provide it. So that's a feeling of, not necessarily, empathy is, there's a certain empathy there. It's much more considerate. It's much more understanding and wanting to immediately do something to help so that they are liked.
Okay.
So the type 2s are liked. That's the type 2 energy in the heart center. The type 3 energy in the heart center is more about performance and achievement, goal achievement. It's really fixated on goals. And it's not that they don't have a connection to feeling, is that their feelings are seen as a way of intrusion or getting in the way of them achieving their goals. So those feelings are sometimes or oftentimes pushed down in favor of, no, that's going to get in the way of achieving the goal. I'll deal with the feelings later, if at all. So it's that focus on the goal over the feelings.
Okay.
The 4 is all about the feelings. So the 4 is our artists, our creatives, our romantics. They're seeking that deep, genuine connection and seeking to always be understood. And there's a true empathy there, in that they feel their own feelings very, very deeply, and they feel other people's feelings as well. So there's this constant connection to feelings that can be immobilizing at times, because it's difficult to get the feelings out of the way or disconnect or compartmentalize. So those are the 3 different feeling styles, either externally focused on other people's needs, not your own. That's the type 2, the helper or giver.
Sure.
Type 3 is pushing down own feelings and needs in favor of achieving a goal. And that's the performer or achiever. And The type 4, which would be more around that creative energy, that artistic, that genuine, that the uniqueness, is about really empathically feeling all the feelings. So if
As
you
a
had to
musician,
select an
yeah,
order for that.
as a musician, I'd connect with the 4. As a
Yeah.
drummer, I love playing improv music, and you have to
Mhm.
be there and feel the energy and the flow
Mhm.
and all those kinds of things. And even a lot of creative endeavors, be it events or even
Mhm.
business processes that are in process of innovation,
Mhm.
that's an important place. Um, and then in the 2 framework, um, there's a tendency to be codependent of
So there are healthy sides and
right,
unhealthy
right.
aspects to each of the types. So
Um,
the unhealthy part would be the codependence, yes.
right. And the healthy side of that is being able to see the things that need to be done, whether, and I often do that. Because of my own direct experience, there are many places and spaces that I've been in where I can recognize patterns and see what's coming next because I've watched them happen so many times.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And that's where you don't necessarily want to step in and say, oh, by the way, right?
yeah,
Because you can't lead someone somewhere that they're not ready to go.
exactly.
Uh,
Readiness is huge.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And then in the 3, I am a constant producer, achiever, overachiever, workaholic, and so that's really incorporating the other 2. I'm more focused on what can I do,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and that's the
and it being about
accountability.
doing it.
Yeah, mhm. Yeah, and accountability in doing it and making it happen.
Absolutely,
Mhm. Very
absolutely.
similar, by the way, to the type 8 energy,
Yeah.
which we talked about execution, getting things done, but they're coming at it from a different center.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and,
Mhm.
and the 2 weave together well.
Yes. Yeah. There's
Interesting.
interconnectivity for sure.
And I'm sure this is kind of exciting for our guests too, to be able to just sit and self-examine themselves or in this process, which is one of the things we don't do.
Yeah.
This is what COVID gave us the opportunity to do. This is the
Yes.
silver lining of it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And perhaps you noticed it as well, where you became really, I almost said desperately introspective.
Yeah. And reflective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. And I hope that others are in that same vein too, and looking for ways to get involved in life that actually supports your passion, your love for yourself and for others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And realizing the interconnectivity of it all.
Right.
Mhm.
And this being an opportunity with planetary citizens,
Mhm.
which I would invite the guests to take a look at, planetarycitizens.net. And I'll just leave it at that. So let's move on to the
Excellent.
head.
Yeah. So the last center that we haven't spoken about, still connected, is the head or thinking center. So we each think through a certain lens primarily,
Mhm.
yet we have access to all 3 of those energies, those perspectives. So the type 5, if you think about it, is the more objective of the 3 different thinking styles. The 5 is all about looking at finding patterns, finding things, making sense, and creating models and frameworks to bring things together to make sense so that they can predict what's likely to happen and be prepared for it so they don't look foolish. It's all about getting all that data, all that information, making it make sense,
Mhm.
seeking knowledge, seeking wisdom so that they ultimately don't look foolish, so that they're prepared. And when someone asks them about something, they have an answer.
If you could kind of expand on what the head center is and how that works.
Absolutely. Thank you. So maybe contrary to some popular belief, everyone does think somehow. One can think through a certain lens.
Right.
We each
Sometimes too
think,
much.
sometimes too much, sometimes not enough.
Yeah.
And it's done through one of 3 different lenses. The 5, the 6, and the 7. The type 5 is the observer or analyst, very objective, very much about looking to see the data, the evidence, the information, compiling it all, bringing it all together, trying to create systems and frameworks that will predict what may happen so that they can be prepared and not look foolish. They
Mhm.
want to be wise, they want to be knowledgeable, they want to know all about everything that's going on, and they want to be seen as this font of knowledge. So that can be contrasted to the type 6, which is the loyal skeptic. So when we have type 5 is the observer, which is very objective. 6 takes it from a standpoint of, hold on a second, bad things do happen, they can happen, and we need to be prepared for them. Mm-hmm. So what is the worst possible thing that could happen? What's the danger that no one else sees that I can see? What is something that I need to be prepared for? What kind of backup plan or contingency plan can I make to be safe, comfortable, and secure? Can I find a tribe to belong to that will help me keep me safe, comfortable, and secure? So there's this longing for safety and comfort and security through being prepared for the worst possible case scenario that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then if that does happen, then they're prepared to actually enact their plan and be safe.
Right.
So 5, objective. 6, worst case scenario planning. 7 is the more optimistic, more looking at the world through rose-colored lenses. So it's not the worst possible scenario, it's the best possible scenario. What is the funnest thing to do? What is the best option that's available to us? What are all the options that are available to us? So the 7s are epicures, are adventurers. Mm-hmm. They're looking at the world through possibility, the lens of possibility and options and opportunities. So those are the 3 different thinking styles. And if you had to select one of those, what would your primary be?
Well, as we've gone through the other 2, there's a mixture, right? And when you were talking about the skeptic, and I reflected on what my dad used to say: plan for the worst, hope for the best, and be happy with what you get.
Yeah.
Right? So that you've got that extra strategy in place, mm-hmm. so that if something does happen, you're prepared and you're not caught unaware.
Exactly.
And for me also, along with that, I observe everything, and I'm looking to, see how it can all fit together, what's there, what the components are, who the personalities are, and how, they can be, from an organizational development standpoint, and how they can be encouraged to move a different way or in their best way. And yet, right. My creative side is like the ultimate optimist. Mm-hmm. Silver linings in everything. It's mm-hmm. just that, how do we reveal them? And so, for me, again, from that organizational development standpoint and as a leader, I'm kind of that way. I mm-hmm. look for opportunities to find joy, find happiness, to encourage others and support them in the process.
Yeah.
Servant leader kind of stuff, I guess. I love to have fun. And I find mm-hmm. that even in the work that I do across from being in early on in the aerospace industry, the events industry, education, theater, music, mm-hmm. all of those kinds of things, it's about having fun.
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, then you're really not engaging it fully, especially in education. It needs to be fun, or you're not really learning a whole lot. You're not encouraged to learn from that, or inspired. If you're not having fun, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Right. So,
and that's a challenge for most
with
people.
all the expressions and the explanations of each, it's really hard to pinpoint. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, that's me, right? Mm-hmm. Because of all the different, now at my age, with all the different experiences that I've had in the industries
and the work that you've done
and the things, so there is that maybe more, I want to say comprehensive, but I'm not sure that's the word I want. There's more of a distribution mm-hmm. of those different facets. So I would be hard pressed to accept to put myself in that first area of, the performance and flow.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is the goal. The goal is to really integrate all 9 of these perspectives, 3 in each of the different centers that we talked about, mm-hmm. so that there is this flow in between all of them, and that we acknowledge and pay attention to every single one of these gifts and energies that are within us.
Right.
Because only
And it's
then do you
important to
become
at
whole.
least know them, right?
Yes. Yes. That's the first part, awareness of them.
Yeah.
And some people may be more prone or more likely to rely on a couple of these energies more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And the invitation, of course, is there to say, well, hold on, there's more. But wait, there's more. And you
Right.
could be even more by accepting them, identifying them, focusing on them, those other energies, those other perspectives that you're not using or relying upon to give you the
So let's
full
flip the
view of the world.
focus for this, speaking of, let's flip the focus and let's go back inside.
Mhm.
How, in your journey, how did you find this information reflective to you
Yeah.
and what you were able to find within yourself and maybe even a greater connection with knowing yourself?
Yeah. So the very first time I was introduced to the Enneagram model was by Helen Palmer, and it just happened to be very, very coincident. It shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. It was meant to happen. She wasn't part of a school. She was someone that a professor of ours knew and just invited her to come in. She was local and she just popped in to do just one class, not even a semester. It was one little class, and talked to us about this system called the Enneagram.
Hmm.
And I was fascinated by it from the get-go. And I immediately said, oh, I'm a 7. I'm a type 7. This is what I gravitated towards, because
Mm-hmm.
more likely than not, people like to think of themselves in the lens of 7, the having that innovation, that reaching out for opportunity, being fun, being visionary, having all those attributes, getting people to come along with you to buy into that vision, to help achieve that vision. So I liked to see myself as that. Now, my classmates who had been with me for several years at this point
Mm-hmm.
were like, you're not a 7. You do not lead with 7. You lead with type 2. And so it's very interesting to have the awareness, right? This is all about self-awareness. So where do you
Right.
see yourself? And then is that really where you are? Or is that where you want to be seen?
Sure.
Now, the
And
interesting
you
thing,
need that outer reflection,
yes,
which is kind of funny because there's a paradox between it doesn't matter what people think, feel, or believe about you, but what you think, feel, and believe about yourself.
right.
And
Mhm.
it also matters what people think, believe, and feel about you. And it doesn't matter what you think, feel, and believe about yourself.
Right.
So there's that paradoxical
Yeah.
bridge,
Yes.
of the inner and the outer.
Right. And it's this box that people are afraid of being put in, but they're already
Mhm.
in it because the outer world is perceiving you or experiencing you in a certain way. So this box does exist. And understanding, maybe not necessarily how it is that you want to be seen, but understanding how you want to be seen, but also how you
Well,
really
at least
are.
there's labels on the box.
Yes.
But you got to step outside of that
Or
to
break out of it.
read.
Exactly. So now you see how the other people are already boxing you or labeling you, and you're realizing that's either that's true or not, might be true, might not be true.
Mhm.
And what if it is true? What of it is true? Not what if it's true. And how do I work with that? And how is that part of me, but is that really all of me? Or is it just a part of me? And how do I grow with that? So
Right.
understanding the box that you're already in is critical, whether it's aligns with your self-awareness and everyone else's perception or not. And then doing something about it and saying, okay, it's a box and no one wants to be in a box. So how do you get out of it? So
Right.
getting out of it is really identifying how you can access all of the other 8 styles or 7 styles if there's 2 that are already dominant and you're being perceived a certain way. And luckily for me, the 7 was my thinking style or is my thinking style. And the 2 is truly my core style. It happens to fall into the feeling center. So it's also my feeling style.
Mhm.
And then my action style is 9. So it's triadic style wise, or tri-type or tri-fix. It's 2, 7, 9 for me. So understanding that from an early age to say that, okay, I am, or not so early age, um, I am looking at the world through this bias, through this lens. And how successful am I being? And in my failures, when I wasn't successful, how did this lens, this 279 lens, this combination of how this worked, the dynamics that resulted as a result of that? How
So
did,
speaking of results,
yeah.
back to your presentation for AT&T, the two of them. Your first one kind of flopped, and we never really did go into how successful the second one was, although it appeared like it was going to be, because you
Yes, it was
flipped
far more
your,
successful. I
yeah,
did not have exits of people in droves. So that was one mark. That was,
right.
I had a couple people at the very beginning when I explained what I was planning on doing and wanted to get what their input was. They said, this is not really what I wanted. And just a few people left. It was not the droves of people that I had from the first one. And the ones that stayed were very intrigued, very interested, asked great questions, and it went really well. So yeah.
So what was the learning there when you, I'm going to shut up. What was the learning there for you, and the differences and the results of them?
So the learning was, I don't necessarily know what every single person in this room wants. And guess what? They probably all want something different. So I'm not going to be able to, and here's a learning for the type 2 as well. You can't please everyone all the time. You can't get everyone to like you all the time. Not everyone will like you, and that's okay. So
More
find,
important to be true to you.
yes. Yeah, definitely be true to yourself in this process. And my goal was there to explain, to share knowledge, to show the system, the Talent Alliance system, and to get people who are interested in it to participate in it. So that was really ultimately what it was, and that needed to be explicitly stated
Sure.
so that people knew what they were in for, and also find out what their expectations were from the workshop. Because a lot of times we go to workshops and there's a description, and sometimes it's, yeah, it kind of fits that description, or it's not, or it's changed since the 6 months before when it was developed, and things have changed since then. So it's really finding out, what do people really need in the moment right now?
Yeah,
And
very
then
true.
how do we address that, or can we even address it?
And we can.
Mhm.
We were talking before we came on about my one of my hats as a partnering facilitator for building road and
Mhm.
bridge construction.
Yes.
When I first started, I was green. I was scared to death being in the middle of a room with a bunch of construction people, from owners of companies to the guys that paint the lines, right?
Mhm.
And what I found was that over time, it's like the more comfortable I got, the better my questions got. And I
Mhm.
finally, there was a point where I realized, oh, I do need to ask them, and I knew it to begin with, but I'd forgotten to include it. What are your expectations from
Yeah.
this meeting? What would you like to get from it?
Mhm.
And how would that, look in regard to your company's participation? And
Mhm.
once I started doing that, and of course you got to pay attention. You in those kind of situations, you don't necessarily have time to write notes down because it is so rapid fire.
Right.
However, the mental notes, oftentimes when you're, and maybe you find this, do you find that when you're more present, comfortable with yourself, that the flow of the conversations, the queries, the
Yes.
kinds of queries even seem
Mhm.
to come up, and even though you may not have been thinking about it, all of a sudden the question to ask is there, and you ask it,
Exactly.
and it's like, night and day with the group.
Right. Yeah, that presence, that being totally, that the active listening to really dive in deep and see
Mhm.
exactly where they are, and getting in that flow moment with them in those conversations, and focusing on the right things at the time, things will emerge that you may not have even expected to or even known would emerge. So new knowledge will come forward, new insights will come forward. The
Right.
group
I call
will
those
be
apocalyptic moments.
exactly apocalyptic moments.
And which is funny, that let me reframe or explain. My understanding comes from the original meaning of apocalypse,
In
which
Greek.
is
Yeah,
uncovering knowledge.
yeah. Apocalypse. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was, something like take the lid off. There's one of the old vernaculars.
Yeah, it's like discover. It's apocalypse, the discovery, the finding. Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and it's a wonderful thing to do, especially, when you're comfortable enough. There's how do you get rid of the fear that becomes present of, probably there is some throughout all the numbers of being that best of you? What kinds of things do you go through internally to get comfortable with the not knowing
Yeah.
and going ahead anyway?
So each of the energies and the types has fears associated with it. I mean, if we just look at the thinking styles from the logic perspective, the fives are the fear of not knowing, right?
Hmm.
Fear of not knowing everything. The six is the fear of not being safe, and the seven is the fear of missing out or the fear of engaging in pain. So each type is going to have their own fears associated um, with their core ego, basically. It really comes down to the ego.
Sure.
And the ego has created this strategy to survive.
Hmm.
A,
And it's not a bad thing. The
no,
ego,
it helped.
there's
It helped.
how long was there, a decade or so where everybody was like, oh, you got to destroy the ego, right? And it has, all these negative connotations about it. And really, it's about alignment. The ego
Yes,
is there for self-protection. It's to
exactly.
give you that drive. And
Yeah,
yet, one of the phrases that I used in my partnering workshops, which got a lot of raised eyebrows, was there's no ego without we go.
yeah.
Because you've
So,
got that the ego is designed to work together with others.
right. In when we activate it in a productive way and we use it appropriately.
Well,
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It's
yeah,
designed to do that,
yes, yeah, hmm,
right? We
yeah,
subjugate it. We, do all the things to dissipate, diminish,
hmm,
self-deprecate it.
yeah,
Uh, and yet it's that foundation that we
mhm,
have that allows us to emerge.
right. Yeah, and it helped us. It helped us survive a critical time in our childhoods, usually, which is why we become so dependent on it and why it becomes so difficult to disengage from it or to see when it's being harmful and when it's not being
Hmm.
necessary and when we need to adopt a different view or push it down.
Right.
Mhm.
Again, I wonder, if the ego just is,
Mhm.
then what can it be? So
It can
that's a
be more.
different.
Yeah, it can be more because it could be the adoption of these other elements that complement it,
Hmm.
right? Not necessarily make it go away, but complement it so that it can be help us be even more effective in all situations as opposed to
Sure.
just that
To
one
nurture and
situation.
grow with
Yeah,
it, or to be nurtured
exactly.
by and grow with it.
Yeah.
In that understanding, what have you found from an organizational development standpoint? Because this is really, that's
Mhm.
your um, bailiwick, right?
My
Uh,
world. Yeah.
yeah, it's your world. What do you find are the most beneficial outcomes
Mhm.
from the work that you've been doing with the companies?
So I'm going to go back to a conversation that we had earlier about readiness. So it
Mm,
really depends on the readiness of the organization and the people within it. When subgroups or subsets of an organization are ready at different times, that's great. We can work with who's ever ready. That's where I find it's the greatest results, the greatest development happens when people are open and ready. So
right.
there's an opening there. There's a pain that needs to be addressed, and they're ready to make a change in
Is
themselves.
there a particular department or division? I'm not sure quite how to frame
Yeah.
it, an area of focus within the organizations that seem to be more ready than others?
So human resources departments usually are more open to any types of these systems, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or DISC or Hogan or Leadership Circle or anything like that.
Right.
Luckily, there are also some very advanced, in tune leaders who may have experienced this as part of their corporate development that saw the growth in themselves and now want to make sure that that same growth happens with their teams and their whole organizations or departments. So I approach it from, it depends on where the opening exists. Is it one-on-one executive coaching, and then the executive sees the benefits of that coaching and the use of the system and says, yeah, I want to expand this to my team and then my entire organization. So that's one route, one way in. Other times it's just an opening from, we need a team building exercise, and no one or not everyone is familiar with it. It just happens to be an engagement, that it's an offsite and they just need something because they want to do something like that. That's one of their goals. And then it grows from that into wow. And then it may grow into individual coaching from that, or even spread throughout the entire organization.
Which is a wonderful thing, right?
It is, because then you have the common knowledge, common understanding, vocabulary, so people can actually see each other, understand each other. If we understand, because again, the Enneagram is a system about motivations, what's your inner core motivation, rather than what's the behavior that we're going to expect of you and your personality.
So what you're doing, what it sounds like anyway, is you're actually digging, I don't want to say, well, yeah, I suppose digging, because there's gold there.
Yeah.
Right?
Or platinum.
Into the inner worlds and that
Yeah.
dynamic that
Yes.
is often unaddressed.
Very often
And you're
unaddressed.
bringing it out and exposing it in safe and compatible ways.
Yeah.
So that folks can feel comfortable, safe, secure, psychologically safe, intellectually humble in a lot of situations, and being able just to receive themselves, and by doing so, open to others accordingly as well.
It requires a lot of vulnerability and a lot of trust, because you're not working at the what level, like, oh, this person's an extrovert, oh, this person's going to be aggressive, or this person's going to be whatever.
Or like the disc, this person that has this particular communication problem solving preference.
Exactly. You're now getting into why do they have that? Why are they exhibiting extroversion or aggression, or
which is what we ask as kids,
communication,
right?
or
how many of us are like, why?
Exactly.
And some of us get shut down. Some of us are encouraged to continue to ask the questions and irritate teachers, and
only because they haven't thought about it themselves, right?
I know.
That's the irritation part, is like, I never thought about that. Now I have to think about it.
Right. And how dare you? Right.
Yeah.
That's usually the response, because questions often seem adversarial to a lot of folks. And why is, again, the question, why is that? Why do queries, innocent, naive, often childlike queries, meet with such resistance?
I think it's because people have not taken the time to question it for themselves. They've just accepted some things as fact and not really done the critical thinking work that's necessary to really understand why things are the way they are. And
one of the things that you mentioned on the or that we were talking about earlier, about my engagement with the human design, and that it really, I found a lot more in there, especially as a, what am I, 5-1 generator, and from the sacral. So what that means is that it's not a tendency, it's an obsession to self-examine.
Yes. Yeah. So that counters that, but it also opens the door to, okay, now I know myself. There are how many other selves out there that I don't have any clue about. So there are other ways of thinking, other ways of perceiving, other gifts that people have that I don't have, or I haven't learned to tap into. Could it be
possible that with that self-examination, you go through enough of, okay, that's not me, yeah, that's me, well, I don't know, maybe, kind of things. It gives you this smattering of, well, as you examine yourself, you begin to see those things in others, and can better inquire of them with a little more Gentleness, I suppose.
And empathy. Yeah.
Compassion,
Yeah,
empathy.
empathy. Absolutely. And that's really, we talked earlier, I'm not sure we talked on recording about this, but the golden rule. And the golden rules is great, but it's introspective. It's all about, looking into what are my values or my rules, what are my ethics, what do I like, what do I don't like, and that's how I'm going to treat everyone else.
Right.
The reality is that different people have different ways that they want to be treated or dealt with or worked with. So that's the platinum rule. So if we figure out how they want to be worked with or dealt with or communicated with, then we changed our style to be more effective with them. And then ultimately, now that we see that there's one or maybe two or three or four or five or nine other ways of what they're looking for, then we integrate that or we access that, like, again, doing more introspection. Where is that within me that I have been hiding or haven't been accessing? How do I bring that up as well and make sure that I'm fully integrated that way?
And in the observation of others, is it the more in tune or the more you understand the Enneagram or other systems, do you begin to see those reflection in others a little more clearly so
Mm.
that and that initial understanding of them is there? But what I want to I'm really curious about, in the golden rule, do we treat others in as they behave toward us? Is that an indication of how they want to be treated? Or do you think that's a mask?
I think it depends. I think it really depends on if everyone is following. So the golden rule would work if every single person wanted everything exactly the same way. They had the same background, same childhood trauma, same like, same dislike, same allergies, same everything like that. If everyone had exactly the same politics, religion, everything, golden rule would work beautifully. The reality is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So the depends part comes in where if people are treating you differently from what you'd like to be treated, are they coming at you from the golden rule of thinking that this is the way I want to be treated? Or maybe they were making the mistake that I was making and saying, I know what you want, this is what it's going to be. And that's not what, even if that's not the way I would have wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're projecting, attributing whatever it is, fundamental attribution error, whatever it is, they're treating you in a way that, again, is not appropriate for you, is not effective with you. And how great would it be to have the conversation to say, what is it that you want? What are your challenges? What motivates you? What engages you? What's your passion? Great. Now I know how to communicate with you, how to connect with you.
Right.
Right. So if we did that with everyone, we would
But that
have a
takes so much
better
time. I
expectation
don't have
point.
time for that. I got to get this stuff done, right?
Well, it might take more time later trying to repair that relationship
Right, exactly.
than it
And
would have
that's what I
from the
felt
get-go.
too. And looking around at all the different industries, and I'm sure that you've seen this too, the patience, the perseverance, the willingness to take the time pays off in priceless amounts,
Yeah,
much sooner than if you wait and then have
yeah,
to repair things,
yeah, yeah.
especially relationships.
I'm working on a new book right now. I know you have 35 books, but I'm working on my next book, not close to 35 yet. And it is exactly about that. It's about being very explicit in your expectations of each other,
Hmm.
finding out what are the expectations of the system, of your boss, of your people, of whatever it is, and making sure that they know yours and you know theirs. Like, what
Right.
do you expect from me in this situation? How do we work together? How do we fix things? How do we whatever?
What's
If
that
we,
number one thing from the corporate? And both my degrees stress this. The main problem in industry is communication.
yeah, exactly.
We don't talk to each other. We don't engage in the ways that are
Yeah,
empowering.
yeah. And
So
part of
how do
that
we
may be
change
golden
that?
rule. Part of that may be really the golden rule because the golden rule says, oh, I don't need to communicate because I know what they want because this is what I want. So I'm going to treat them the way that I want to be treated. I'm going to, I understand this problem from my perspective. So they must be understanding it from my perspective as well.
Hmm. No,
So that,
that's where the egoic personality
yeah,
begins to rise up. That it's it's self-centered rather than others-centered. And
Exactly.
you know, I'm reminded of an old, well, not so old, law of one, that you know, states it's either that we have two modus operandi, service to self or service to others. And yet, you know, over the years, I found that, you know, the best service to self is really service to others.
Right. Through service to others. Yep.
Yeah, and of
Mhm.
course, Dale Carnegie knew that as well. There's smatterings
Yeah.
of this kind
Yeah.
of approach
Hmm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
However, you have to look for it. You have to be willing to realize that, oh, something needs to change because I'm not being met with what I need. And
Right.
do you find that most challenges come from unspoken and unfulfilled expectations?
100%. Yep.
How do we speak them then, like you're saying? What kind of conversations or what kind of lead-ins do you find are the best to begin to peel back the layers of the onion to get to know the person better?
I would recommend having some coaching schools call it contracts, right? But just
Mhm.
it's a conversation, as you said, it's a conversation that says, what are your preferred modes of communication? I mean, there's so much stuff out there about the love languages and you know, communication styles and anything along those lines. But
There's so much that it can get confusing and
it
make
does.
one just kind of rescind and go, oh my God,
Yeah.
what am I going to do?
Right. Yeah. So what I'd recommend is having the conversation and say, where do you normally come from? You know, how do you make decisions? What do you look for in communication? You know, how do you like to communicate? Do I never call you? Do I just text you? It's, you know, how do we find out how we're doing in this relationship and in the performance of this
Mhm.
role?
That's
How do
so
you like to get
foreign though.
feedback? Hmm?
Right? I mean, it's so foreign in most relationships and
Yeah,
industry, especially in customer service today.
yeah,
'Cause it really sucks
yeah,
in most situations.
yeah.
So how do you see that being taken to a new level?
Mm,
And do you see it happening? Yeah, is it even happening? I mean, granted, there's
yeah,
your work, my work, but we only touch you know, a
yeah,
minuscule percentage of the
right.
population. And how can we get that? And most people, you know, you ask them those kind of questions, they don't know.
Right. Yeah. So the way I'm getting to it from, and again, this is another new book, a totally new book. Giving people a worksheet to say, okay, let's sit down together and let's ask these questions. Like, what are we here to accomplish together? Like, how do we want to do this? How do we want to work together?
Mhm.
How often do we want to meet? When do we check in? When do we give back feedback to each other?
So
How
there's
do
a
we give feedback to each
mindful activity.
Yes.
There's a choice to engage rather
Yes.
than just let it happen.
Right. And it's not personal, right? Because that's the other point of it. People might take things personally. Why are you having this conversation with me? This is no, we have this conversation with everyone. And
Mhm.
the same questions get asked from every single person. And we're going to get to a common understanding because I'll tell you how I see things. You'll tell me how you see things. If we see things differently, fantastic. If we see things the same way, fantastic. What are
Sure.
we missing? How do we
Yeah.
fill in the gaps?
Yeah.
What if see eye to
Similar
eye?
things.
Yeah. So
It,
just having this contract or understanding or agreement from the get-go, from the very beginning. Now, corporations do this backwards usually because they expect people to all want or operate the same way with these minimal points of guidance. And then when things go awry, there's a 1 year performance review or evaluation, which a lot of times is a surprise to people because they've never gotten the feedback along the way. They've never had that agreement to have the feedback along the way. So they know that they should be changing things because expectations aren't being met.
Mhm.
Or even more
And you
passive
can sense that.
aggressively.
You know,
Yes,
we're back to the gut,
absolutely.
right? So
Absolutely.
you feel whether things are copacetic or
Yeah.
awry,
Yeah.
and what do you do about it?
Yeah.
How do you take that feeling, that gut feeling of,
Mhm.
"Ugh," and be vulnerable, fearless enough
Yeah.
to start asking questions
Right.
or, have a deeper observation, because you need to talk to someone,
Hmm.
because that conversation in your head is, it's like those two warriors
Yeah.
um, that never come together.
Right. And sometimes it's real and sometimes it's imagined. And sometimes even when you do have the bravery and you work up the courage to have the conversation, the person that you're having it doesn't have the bravery or courage to have the conversation back with you
Mhm. And
and
then,
wants to wait
and
until the
sometimes there's a huge heart opening because somebody
yeah.
finally broke the ice. It's like,
Yes.
it's like some in meetings, right? Where there's that one person
Yeah.
that asks questions that's on
Mhm.
everybody's mind, but
Mhm.
none of them are strong enough to ask.
Right. Exactly.
And they're all going,
And
I'm glad
hopefully
they
nothing
asked
bad
that
happens to
question.
them. And hopefully nothing bad happens to them. Yeah.
Right.
But the other point I was going to make was the sometimes it things don't get addressed because of the fear of change or conflict or hurting the relationship, and then you end up doing a 360-degree feedback, and all these other things come up that the person never realized or never
Right.
knew about because no one had the courage. The culture wasn't the way that this information could have been relayed in a
And culture,
much
so
sooner way. Yeah.
in cultures, and since you've had, some tenure in the industry, how have you seen the culture shifting over the last few
Mm.
decades? Because it was very command and control driven.
Yes. And there are still some pockets of that for sure
Hmm.
in some industries and organizations. So there's a far more collaborative culture that's being driven. Sadly, there aren't foundations and systems in place to support it. So performance reviews are still individual. It's how do we're moving to teams, we're moving to collaboration, we're moving to leaders and managers being coaches rather than having that command and control.
Hmm.
And I don't think anyone's figured it out yet about, okay, our systems need to catch up to that. So there's no way that our systems can support this new way of working. So I think that there is a change in culture for sure. And our
Well, it's not
systems
really in
now,
the systems. We've got some really messed up systems globally.
yeah,
Um, and to be able to change them, we can't change the systems without changing leadership in them.
right.
And, it's just the mismanagement as to why everything is cattywampus, in my opinion. And so with these kinds of tools, then it gives that opportunity for systems or those within the systems to have some incremental change that most often, it's like the product curve, right? It's a
Yeah,
very slow incline for a while, and then all of a sudden it's the best thing since sliced bread.
right. It catches. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
100th
see
month.
that happening in the near future?
I'm
2 to
hopeful.
5 years?
In 5 years, in just 5 years.
Yeah. Now I'm basing this on the rapid development and deployment we've seen with AI and the shift that
Mm,
the working space has been in, from being in offices to being remote to now hybrid,
mhm.
and who knows what might evolve out of that
Yeah,
as well. So there's some changes taking place within the structures, right,
yeah,
that are just happening.
right.
So how does this uh, perhaps affect this organizational leadership
Yeah.
shift as well?
I would love to see it happen within 5 years. I think that it's probably going to take a little longer. The Enneagram is an amazing tool that help go in that direction.
Hmm. So maybe
And
a generation, depending.
I'm hopeful. And that's again, yes. And that's why I wrote the children's book, because thinking, okay, it may be too late for some of us, but maybe there's hope in the children. And if we can get the children to understand that diversity of perspective and the value of that, and integrating all the 9 perspectives together rather than thinking that one is the best way and the only way, and that everyone
Right.
else should be adopting yours. If we get that, I mean, that ultimately really could lead to world peace. It really could. if everyone gets that same mindset about, yeah, everyone's perspective is valid, let's find what's valid in it for each of us, and how do we integrate that and get to it from understanding that,
And everybody's on their own hero's journey.
yes, and that not anyone has the best answer or the best religion or the best politics or whatever it is, right? It's there's good in all, and we need to extract it all and not succumb to the bad in it
Right.
as well.
Well, there was a conversation happening on LinkedIn. A friend of mine, a professor and consultant from Lebanon,
Mhm.
and he was talking about the male-driven society,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of where we're at.
Mhm.
We have men in charge in government,
Yep.
in religion,
Yep.
um, and so there's a lot of command and control systems still,
Yes.
and there's this, I think, desire, curiosity, and maybe even a bit confusion about what the divine feminine is about, and that
Mhm.
feminine side in the
Mhm.
masculine
Yep.
framework that's been suppressed for
Yep.
so long. And
Yep.
yet many of the, indigenous tribes, they're
Yeah.
all matrilineal.
Exactly. Exactly.
So do you see in leadership and where you've been and what you see, do you see the ranks of the leadership shifting to more openness with um, more feminine or women in leadership places and more diversity as well?
I am seeing, so with some of my clients, my coaching clients, I do see that.
Mhm.
I do see that the more feminine leadership style, and by saying feminine, I'm going to go with the more emotional intelligence,
Empathic.
compassion.
Yeah, emotional
Yeah,
intelligence. We used
not
to call
not
that interpersonal skills, right?
yes, exactly. So I'm seeing that being more highly rewarded than in the past. So there is hope there. And yeah, so I do see that with some of my clients. And again, I think it depends. It depends on industries and companies and their cultures, and again, who is running them and for how long, and is it a family-owned company and all
Yeah,
that.
there's all kinds of factors. I
Mhm.
realize that, and there's no, generalized answer. We can globalize things and we can be hopeful with
Mhm.
the niceties, and yet it's the work and the challenge of
Yeah,
this that drives us,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. The United States still has not had a female president.
Yeah. Wouldn't,
Still.
wouldn't that be wonderful? I wonder what would happen. Um, who knows?
Mhm.
So we're about out of time. Do you have something that you might offer as a tasty tidbit for daily activity that a
Yeah.
person might entertain?
We did the rundown of the three different centers with the three different types within each center, the three different energies within each center.
Hmm.
I would say a daily rundown or a daily practice would be knowing where you normally lead from, what your core type may be, to check in with yourself every day and say, okay, I get it. This is where my core is. This is where I'm most comfortable. This is where my ego has helped me survive. And this is why I've adopted this.
Hmm.
What am I dealing with right now today? What's going on for me today? And is this the best way to approach it? What else could I be? What other energy could I be drawing from today so that I can be a better representation or manifestation of myself? So I'm not putting myself in a box that other people are seeing and saying, yeah, that's the box that that person's always in. And how can I adopt other perspectives to be even better?
Cool. Really appreciate your time, Carl. This has been a
Thank you.
wonderful conversation. I still didn't get your answer on where you pegged me on that scale, but that's okay.
I don't do that. I will
I
not
know.
do that. That's
Well,
totally up to
the
you.
outer view and so all that.
It's
Um,
always up to the person to make that determination for themselves, even if it's incorrect, because it's correct for them at that point of their journey. And later on, they might realize, oh, I'm really this other point, and do the work there too as well. And it's great because it's all part of us.
yeah, exactly. And for me, it's just like, what do I need to be in this moment?
Exactly.
and just be there.
Exactly.
Not put any labels or constrictions or anything.
Mhm.
Just find that flow and step into it.
Right.
Which is what this is designed to do.
Absolutely.
Super. Karl,
Mhm.
thanks so much again. This has been
Thank you so
wonderful.
much, Zen.
Congratulations on your books and much success in your future one. I'd love to have a copy.
Thank you. I'm not going to make it to 35. I know that.
I didn't think I would either. Right?
Okay.
So you just never know.
You never know.
Very
Embrace the
good.
moment.
Well, much success on your journey. Thanks again.
Yours too.
And namaste and in
Namaste.
la catch. And thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World, the New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and I will see you next time.